My name is Alan Corrigan. I'm 39 years old, and I've been building software systems for nearly 2 decades. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I've spent the last 8 years working for a tech company called Zenith Analytics. But before I tell you what they did to me, you need to understand how this whole thing started. 8 years ago, back in 2017, I wasn't an employee of Zenith. I was an independent consultant. They needed someone who could design their entire data platform architecture from scratch, something scalable and robust enough to handle millions of transactions. They found me through a mutual connection, and we struck a deal. But here's the thing. I wasn't naive. I'd been in this industry long enough to know how companies operate. So when I drafted the contract, I included a very specific clause. Any commercial use, sale, or transfer of the system I built would require my explicit written authorization. They signed it. Their lawyers reviewed it. Everyone agreed. After the platform was up and running, they offered me a full-time position. The pay was good, around $145,000 a year with benefits, and I figured I'd finally have some stability. So I accepted in early 2018. The original licensing contract, it stayed active. Nobody ever canceled it. Nobody ever replaced it with something else. It just sat there, legally binding, quietly waiting in some forgotten folder on their legal department's server. For 8 years, I showed up every day. I maintained the system, improved it, scaled it as the company grew. Zenith went from a modest startup to a serious player in the data analytics space. They landed major clients, raised funding rounds, opened offices in 3 states. And I was proud of what I'd built. I thought I was part of something meaningful. Then about 3 months ago, in July 2025, I started noticing something strange. There were unusual access logs on the code repository. Someone was poking around in parts of the system that hadn't been touched in years. Then I saw changes being made to the authentication servers that were still registered under my name, through a third-party licensing service I'd set up when I first built the platform back in 2017. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. I didn't panic. I didn't confront anyone. I just started watching more carefully. I reviewed server logs, tracked access patterns, documented every suspicious activity. And then, one Friday afternoon in early August, the news broke internally. Zenith had sold the entire platform to a European tech giant for $600 million. $600 million. The email went out to senior staff first, then trickled down to the rest of us. There were congratulations, champagne toasts in the executive suite, talk of bonuses and expansion. My name wasn't mentioned once. Nobody called me. Nobody sent me a courtesy email. I found out the same way the junior developers did, through a company-wide announcement. But what really got me was the conversation I overheard 2 days later in the break room. Our CFO was talking to the VP of Operations, and they didn't realize I was around the corner. They were discussing the transition timeline, and then one of them said it. "We'll let Corrigan go right after the handoff. No point keeping him on payroll once the new owners take over." That's when I understood. They weren't just selling my work without telling me. They were planning to cut me loose the moment the deal closed, as if I were some disposable contractor who'd outlived his usefulness. They thought they could erase me from the equation entirely, rewrite history, and pretend the platform had always belonged solely to Zenith. I went home that night and didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the years I'd put into that company, the late nights debugging critical issues, the weekends I'd spent optimizing performance when clients were threatening to leave. I thought about all the times I'd been told I was invaluable, that I was the backbone of the operation, and now they were going to kick me to the curb the second the money hit their accounts. But anger wasn't going to help me. I've learned over the years that emotion clouds judgment, and I needed to think clearly. So instead of storming into the office on Monday morning demanding explanations, I did what I do best. I started gathering information. I pulled up the original licensing contract from my personal archives, the one I'd signed back in 2017. I read through every page, every clause, every footnote, And there it was, just as I remembered it. Section 7, Paragraph 3. Any commercial transfer, sale, or sublicensing of the software system requires explicit written authorization from the original developer, Alan Corrigan. Failure to obtain such authorization renders any transfer null and void and grants the developer the right to revoke usage rights immediately. It was crystal clear. The contract had never been terminated, never been superseded by my employment agreement from 2018. Legally, it was still active. The company's lawyers had either forgotten about it entirely, or they'd assumed it didn't matter anymore since I was now an employee. Either way, they'd made a massive mistake. I started digging deeper into the technical side. The authentication system I'd built 8 years ago was still the foundation of the entire platform. Every login, every data query, every client interaction ran through servers that were licensed under my name with a third-party provider based in Delaware. I'd set it up that way initially as a security measure, to ensure I maintained control during the development phase. Once I became an employee in 2018, nobody ever bothered to transfer those licenses to the company. They probably didn't even know they existed. Over the next 2 weeks in mid-August, I watched as Zenith prepared for the handoff. There were meetings with the European buyers, technical audits, documentation reviews. I sat in on some of those meetings, listening to executives describe the platform's capabilities, its scalability, its elegant architecture. They talked about it like it was their creation, their innovation. My contributions were mentioned in passing, if at all, usually in the form of, "Our team built this," or "We developed that." I kept my mouth shut. I smiled, nodded, answered technical questions when asked. Nobody suspected a thing. The deal was scheduled to close on Thursday, August 28th. The final transfer of assets, the wire transfer of funds, everything was set to happen at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The European company had already started announcing the acquisition to their shareholders. Zenith's executives had already started planning how they'd spend their bonuses, and I had already made my decision. On Wednesday night, August 27th at 11:47 p.m., I logged into the licensing server. I accessed the administrative panel, the one that controlled the authentication certificates for the entire platform. And I activated the automatic revocation protocol I'd built into the system years ago, a failsafe I'd included in case of exactly this kind of contractual violation. The protocol was simple. If the system detected an unauthorized transfer attempt, it would immediately suspend the license and trigger a contingency mode. All client-facing services would continue to function for 24 hours to prevent data loss, but every dashboard, every admin panel, every executive interface would display a single message: "License invalid, unauthorized transfer detected." I didn't send an email, I didn't make a phone call, I didn't leave a note, I just executed the command, logged out, and went to bed. The next morning, Thursday, August 28th, my phone started ringing at 6:15 a.m. It was the CTO, his voice barely controlled. "Alan, we've got a major system alert, something about licensing. Can you get to the office right now?" I told him I'd be there in an hour. I took my time getting ready, stopped for coffee at a local shop on Trade Street, drove the speed limit all the way to the office. When I walked into the building at 7:45, it was chaos. People were running between conference rooms, phones were ringing nonstop, and I could hear raised voices coming from the executive suite. The CTO grabbed me the second I stepped off the elevator. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, showing me his laptop. There it was, right on the main dashboard. "License invalid, unauthorized transfer detected. Contact system administrator for resolution." I looked at the screen, then looked at him. "Looks like a licensing issue," I said calmly. "We know that," he snapped. "Can you fix it?" I shook my head slowly. "That's not a technical problem, that's a legal one." His face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "The licensing contract from 2017, I explained, keeping my voice even. "The one that requires my authorization for any commercial transfer. Nobody ever asked me to sign off on this sale." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then the blood drained from his face completely. You're telling me you still own the license to our platform? I'm telling you the original contract is still active, I replied. And according to that contract, this sale violates the terms. So the system did exactly what it was designed to do. It protected my intellectual property. He started to say something, then stopped. He turned and practically ran toward the CEO's office. I stood there in the hallway, listening to the muffled shouting that erupted behind the closed door. Within minutes, lawyers were being called. Emergency meetings were being scheduled, and someone was trying desperately to get the European buyers on the phone to explain why the system they'd just paid $600 million for was now displaying an error message. I went to my desk and started packing my personal items. A few photos, some books, my backup hard drive. I wasn't in a hurry, but I knew what was coming. Around 10 a.m., I got called into a conference room. The CEO was there, along with the CFO, the head of legal, and two lawyers I'd never seen before. They looked like they hadn't slept. The CEO tried to keep his composure. "Alan, we need to discuss this situation," he began, his voice tight. "We understand there may have been some miscommunication regarding the licensing agreement." "There was no miscommunication," I said quietly. "The contract is very clear. Section 7, paragraph 3. Any commercial transfer requires my written authorization." "I never gave it." One of the outside lawyers leaned forward. "Mr. Corrigan, surely you understand that as an employee of Zenith Analytics, any work you've done over the past 8 years falls under the company's ownership." "That's correct," I agreed. "But the original platform, the core architecture that everything else is built on, was created before I became an employee, under a licensing contract that's still legally binding." The CEO's jaw clenched. "What do you want, Alan? Money? A percentage of the sale? Just name your price." I looked at him for a long moment. What I wanted was basic respect, a conversation, maybe a heads up before you sold something I built. Instead, I found out through a company-wide email, and then I overheard you planning to fire me the second the deal closed. The room went silent. The CEO's face reddened slightly, but he didn't deny it. He couldn't. He knew I'd heard everything. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice still calm. "I'm going to leave this office today. I'm going to give all my documentation, all my evidence to my attorney. And you're going to explain to your buyers why the platform they just purchased doesn't actually belong to you." The head of legal jumped in. "If you think you can extort this company—" "I'm not extorting anyone," I cut her off. "I'm enforcing a contract that your company signed. If you'd followed the terms, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I stood up. "I'll be available through my lawyer if you need to discuss licensing terms. Until then, the revocation stands." I walked out of that conference room, collected my box of belongings from my desk, and drove home. My phone rang continuously for the rest of the day. I didn't answer. I'd already said everything that needed to be said. By Friday afternoon, August 29th, the news had leaked to the tech press. The headlines were brutal. Major tech acquisition frozen due to licensing dispute. Zenith Analytics deal in jeopardy over IP claims. The European buyers released a statement saying they were conducting an urgent legal and technical audit before proceeding with any payments. Translation: they were furious and looking for a way out. Over the weekend, I met with my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Rodriguez, who specialized in intellectual property and contract law. I gave her copies of everything: the original licensing agreement from 2017, my employment contract from 2018, server logs showing the authentication system was still registered under my name, email chains that proved the company knew about the licensing structure but never bothered to address it. Patricia reviewed everything and looked up at me with something close to admiration. "This is airtight," she said. "They don't have a leg to stand on. The question is, what do you want to do? You could negotiate a settlement, demand a percentage of the sale, or you could push for full revocation and take your IP elsewhere." I thought about it for a moment. I want them to understand that you can't treat people like disposable assets, and I want to make sure this doesn't happen to me again. By Monday, September 1st, the situation had completely deteriorated. The European buyers had officially frozen all payments pending resolution of the IP dispute. Zenith's stock price dropped 40% in 2 days. The board called an emergency meeting. 3 executives, including the CFO I'd overheard in the break room, were placed on administrative leave. Investors were threatening lawsuits. Former clients were questioning whether their data had been handled properly if the company couldn't even manage its own licensing agreements. The CEO reached out through Patricia, requesting a face-to-face meeting. No lawyers, just him and me. Against my attorney's advice, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Charlotte, neutral territory. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in a week. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual confident demeanor was gone. "I underestimated you," he said simply. "I thought you were just a developer who'd be grateful for a steady paycheck." I was wrong. "You weren't wrong about me being grateful," I replied. "I was grateful. For 8 years I gave this company everything I had. But gratitude goes both ways. You treated me like I was expendable, like my contributions didn't matter. So when you tried to sell my work without even telling me, you made a choice, and choices have consequences." He nodded slowly. "The board wants to settle. They're willing to offer you $10 million to release the license and walk away quietly." $10 million. It was a staggering amount of money, more than I'd make in a lifetime of steady employment. But it wasn't about the money. Not really. "Here's my counteroffer," I said. "You release me from any employment obligations immediately. You provide a written statement acknowledging my role as the original architect of the platform, and you agree that any future disputes regarding this matter will be handled through arbitration, not litigation. In exchange, I'll transfer the licensing rights to Zenith within 30 days, giving you time to salvage what's left of your deal." He looked surprised. "That's it? No percentage? No payout?" "That's it," I confirmed. "I don't want to destroy the company. I just want what I'm owed, recognition and respect." We shook hands on it. The paperwork was drawn up by end of business that day. I signed the release, they signed their acknowledgement, and exactly 29 days later, on September 30th, I transferred the licensing rights. By then, the European buyers had renegotiated the deal down to $420 million, a massive haircut from the original $600 million. Zenith lost a fortune, their reputation took a serious hit, and several executives lost their jobs. As for me, I took 2 weeks off in early October. I didn't check my email, didn't follow the tech news, didn't think about Zenith at all. I went hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, read books I'd been meaning to get to for years, and spent time figuring out what I actually wanted to do next. The answer came from an unexpected source. About 3 weeks after I left Zenith in mid-October 2025, I got a call from a company called Data Stream Solutions, one of Zenith's main competitors in the analytics space. They were based in Austin, Texas, and they'd been following the whole situation closely. The CEO, a guy named Robert Thornton, was direct. "We know what happened with Zenith," he said, "and frankly, we think they got what they deserved. We're looking to build out our platform infrastructure, and we want someone who understands not just the technical side, but the business side too. Someone who knows how to protect their work." "What are you offering?" I asked. "We want you as a partner," Robert said. "Not an employee, not a consultant, a partner. You'd own 20% of the company, you'd lead the entire technical architecture division, and you'd have full creative control over how we build our systems. Plus, we'll structure the IP agreement so that you maintain co-ownership of anything you create." I flew to Austin the following week. I met with their team, reviewed their business model, and examined their financials. They were solid. They had good clients, smart investors, and most importantly, they had integrity. They weren't trying to cut corners or pull fast ones. They genuinely wanted to build something sustainable. I accepted the offer. By late October, I'd relocated to Austin and started work on a completely new platform architecture, one that was even more advanced than what I'd built for Zenith. This time, though, everything was documented properly. Every line of code was tracked, every IP agreement was ironclad, and my name was on the patents alongside the company's. The system I designed for DataStream incorporated everything I'd learned over the past decade, plus innovations I'd never had the freedom to implement at Zenith. We built in better security protocols, more efficient data processing algorithms, and a modular structure that could scale infinitely without performance degradation. Within 4 months, we had our first major client, a Fortune 500 healthcare company that had previously worked with Zenith but left after the licensing scandal damaged their trust. Word spread quickly in the industry. People knew what had happened. Developers and engineers reached out to me on LinkedIn, thanking me for standing up for IP rights. Several told me they'd been in similar situations but didn't have the leverage to fight back. Investors started paying more attention to licensing agreements and IP ownership in their due diligence. The whole incident had sparked a broader conversation about how tech companies treat their core developers. Zenith, meanwhile, never fully recovered. The reduced sale price meant they had to lay off nearly 30% of their workforce to meet investor expectations. Several of their major clients left, either because of the uncertainty or because competitors like DataStream offered better alternatives. The executives who'd been placed on administrative leave were eventually let go with minimal severance. The company still exists, but it's a shadow of what it was. Their reputation in the industry took a hit they'll probably never completely overcome. I don't take pleasure in their downfall. I didn't set out to destroy them. All I did was enforce a contract they'd signed and then forgotten about. If they'd approached me honestly, if they'd included me in the conversation, if they'd shown even basic respect for the work I'd done, none of this would have happened. They'd have their $600 million, they'd have kept their reputation intact, and I'd probably still be working there. But they made a choice. They chose to treat me like I was expendable, like my contributions were theirs to sell without my knowledge or consent. And when you make that kind of choice, you have to live with the consequences. These days, I'm exactly where I want to be. I'm building cutting-edge technology with a team that respects my expertise. I own a significant stake in a company that values innovation and integrity. I have control over my own intellectual property, with legal protections that ensure I'll never be in this position again. And I've learned something valuable. In this industry, your worth isn't determined by how long you stay loyal to a company. It's determined by how well you protect your own interests while delivering excellent work. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or loud. You don't need to shout or make threats or burn bridges publicly. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remember what you're owed, enforce the agreements that people thought they could ignore, and walk away with your dignity intact. Zenith tried to erase me from the story of their success. Instead, they ended up proving exactly how central I was to everything they'd built. They thought they were selling a platform. What they were really selling was my work, my expertise, my years of dedication. And when they tried to do it without me, the whole thing fell apart. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to remind them of one simple truth. The person who understands the systems, both technical and legal, is the person who actually holds the power, not the executives in their corner offices, not the investors with their spreadsheets, not the lawyers with their fancy degrees. The person who built it from the ground up, that person was me. And they forgot that at their own expense. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and turn on notifications to get new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.